11 minutes past 10 now. Joni Cameron-Blair was 15 years old when she was sent to Beechwood Children's Home in Nottingham to escape her violent father. She spent just 10 weeks there before being returned to her mother, but the abuse she says she suffered and witnessed there compelled her many years later to become a children's home inspector. But as an inspector, she was shocked to witness the same abuse and neglect carried out in care homes across Nottingham. Years before, when she'd been there, it was still going on. She says the evidence of what she saw was ignored and altered by senior staff at the City and County Council. Nottinghamshire Police are now investigating allegations of abuse relating to 12 children's homes across Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire as part of Operation Daybreak. I've been speaking to Joni about her experiences, and some of what you hear you might find upsetting, just to warn you. She started off by telling me how she ended up in Beechwood.
My father was psychologically ill. He had problems. He was drinking heavily, which exacerbated his mental health. And he turned very violent, which resulted in a serious assault against myself, which resulted in a head injury that saw me hospitalised and then taken into care, which was about 10 weeks all in all. It was only a very brief window.
And this was a pretty traumatic experience, wasn't it, being taken?
Absolutely.
Because the word care would be in inverted commas, wasn't it? I mean, you felt you were treated like a criminal.
I was absolutely treated as a criminal. When I was placed in Beechwood, I was taken to what I thought was going to be a bedroom, but in actual fact, I was placed into a cell. I spent many, many weeks incarcerated in that cell for many hours a day, without a toilet, without a sink, without access to water or fresh air or my family members. I was placed in solitary confinement for anywhere between 12, 13, 14 hours a day sometimes.
And what was that like?
Terrible. It was terrible. You're left alone with your own thoughts. And I'd just been obviously seriously assaulted. And obviously, naturally, I wanted my mum and my siblings, which I was denied access to.
So you went from an extremely dangerous, physically dangerous, emotionally disturbing situation into a situation that sounds equally bad.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just going from one set of circumstances into another. But of course, where Beechwood, it was a totally uncontrolled environment. And I had nobody there to help me, along with all the other children that was also placed there. The people that should have been caring were not caring at all.
You also had a police officer carry out a sexual interference check on you after you were assaulted. Tell us what happened there.
When I was taken from the hospital by the social services, I was taken to a police station in Nottingham. The officer who was dealing with the case, he was a CID officer. He said he needed to examine me and take photographs of my injuries. It was during that instant that he said he needed to sexually examine me to check to see if I was a virgin. I had no idea that man had absolutely no legal jurisdiction to do that, and he had absolutely no medical qualifications to perform that examination either. It was my mother who became increasingly concerned sometime later when she discovered that that had happened to me, as she challenged it and placed a complaint against the police.
And you were told then that he was too ill to be interviewed. This is many years later.
Yes, many, many, many years, 35 years later, I was told he was too ill to be interviewed. But in actual fact, he wasn't too ill at all. He was absolutely well, which also left me questioning why did that happen? One of those things, I'm afraid.
It's just another part of your story that feeds into the general feeling of corruption within the system, because you were mentioning
mistrust
yes. And corruption, and you were mentioning when you were in there, when you first went to Beechwood, albeit just for a matter of weeks, not only did bad things happen to you, but you saw bad things happen to plenty of other children, didn't you? Tell us what you saw.
I did. I witnessed a young lady being raped. I witnessed children being denied food. I witnessed children being force-fed food. I witnessed children being beaten on a regular basis with absolutely no controls in place at all. I witnessed children having psychological games played against them. Children routinely ran away only for staff members to set their watch by them and take bets on how long it was going to be before the police brought them back. When police brought them back, that would be announced to all the children in the unit as a warning as to what would happen, that you would only be brought back. Just some very, very, very cruel behaviour towards children. It was sickening. It was truly sickening to witness.
It's a terrible list of offences, but just specifically on you witnessing a rape, what were the specifics of that? Where were you?
It was my friend next door, in the cell next door to me. I couldn't see the rape, but I could hear it, and it was happening routinely. Yes, it was happening routinely. I do struggle with discussing that, if you don't mind.
No, I understand. It's just
it brings back that memory. Yes,
I don't want to have a prurient interest in the worst aspects of this, but it just helps us, our
Build
listeners, everybody understand just how depraved the treatment of people at this centre was at the time. Did you speak up? Did you when you got out of Beechwood? Did you go out? Did you talk to your family? Did you talk to the authorities?
I think my family knew. It was a pretty traumatic experience for me, but I, to be honest with you, Claire, I couldn't really talk about it. I couldn't discuss it. I wasn't there for that long, thankfully. My mother managed to get me out. It was after I left Beechwood, and you grow, you become educated, you get married and have your own children and your own family, and you look back, and it's as you grow and develop your morals and principles, that's when I began to realise what happened to me was just absolutely wrong. And what happened to those children was just absolutely staggeringly awful. And I set about wanting to help in some way. First of all, I wanted to go into the medical profession, but I changed direction when I heard an interview come up advertised on the radio for people to come forward who had Pacific care experience to join the Inspectorate. That was when I made the application and I got the post.
So you became one of the inspectors who would go into places like Beechwood to examine the place, examine how children were being treated. And you did this on several occasions, didn't you? What was the first year you did that?
The first years, it was probably about 1994 to 2000.
And what did you put in your report? What had changed? Had anything changed?
There were rare cases of good children's homes. They were mainly quite bad. Not all as abusive as Beechwood, but there were many as abusive. But I initially started off into the county. I wasn't working for the city at that time. And I was not just dealing with children's homes. I was dealing with older persons' homes, respite care units and so forth. So I was across the board in the care sector. The city and the county then divided, and then I moved into the city. That's when I started really sort of inspecting the city homes, and that was when I became extremely alarmed as to what I was witnessing. I first raised my complaints within the Inspectorate approximately 95 to 96. I was taking my concerns to my superiors. And it wasn't until about 18 months when I started documenting people's behaviour towards children. And I was going back maybe a year later or 2 years back to that same home, because it didn't always happen annually. Sometimes it could be 2, possibly 3 years. And I would go back and I would see the same members of staff still working there, despite me feeding back my concerns and complaints. And then I also noticed that my reports would be doctored and manufactured, and my verbatim would be removed. And I began to question this practice.
What was going on, do you think?
I think there were lots of contributing factors, to be honest with you, Claire. I think a lot of it was about reputational protection. A lot of it was about protection for the insurance company policy. A lot of it was about the hierarchy protection of their own personal positions, pay and pensions. It certainly wasn't protection for children. I certainly didn't see any protection for children, despite the numerous concerns and complaints that I was taking to the Inspectorate. I then took my concerns away from the Inspectorate because I realised that no action was taking place. So I then took it to the panel. The panel consisted of the Chief Executive of Nottingham City Council, the Director of Social Services and the Assistant Director of Social Services, and a lot of other, top people. And it was during these meetings that I ensured that my concerns were minuted. I needed documented proof that I was sharing my concerns, and still no action was happening. And when I challenged that action, and when they said to me and announced to me on that panel that they would be having investigations, I would no sooner get home, and within days of addressing the panel, they would cancel those meetings and cancel those investigations. I mean, it was just quite staggering. I was just banging my head against a brick wall, and for the life of me, even today, I don't know why. I don't know why they was preventing me from following me in my duty of care to protect children.
So this was a variety of care situations, including Beechwood, that you were looking into?
Well, it wasn't just Beechwood. There were several homes within quick succession that I'd inspected. What I was witnessing was absolutely alarming. Children were being denied food and fluids. They were being beaten by 18-stone men. Children as young as 7 years of age was using prison terminology. Male members of staff were inappropriately touching children and speaking to children in a very sexualised way. This was serious stuff. Children were having to urinate and defecate out of windows. The children's homes, those facilities were for the children. These homes were locked up. Children were not allowed to access those facilities, even down to the basic use of a toilet. Children were kept and made to stand and forced to stand for very long periods of time in corridors, and routinely kicked by members of staff as they did so. Cooks had been providing a meal for the children. The children wasn't allowed that meal. It was the staff members that was taking the food and denying children the food.
And people listening to this will find it staggering that you went on repeated occasions to the local authority at the highest level and said, I have evidence of this. They then said, we will have meetings, we will take it further. Nothing happened.
Nothing happened. I have minutes of a meeting where the Chief Executive addressed a panel stating he was aware of my concerns and that he would meet with me on a one-to-one basis after the panel meeting. Sometime later, I received a letter and he cancelled that meeting with me, despite knowing my concerns.
You kept all the minutes from those meetings, though, didn't you?
Yes,
I did. Which actually, obviously, came into play when you read about an investigation into Beechwood in a local newspaper. So tell us what happened from that point onwards.
It was, well, let me go back a little while. 2002 came to a head. I lost all sense of who to turn to. So I threatened the council with the media because I had nowhere else I had no other option. It was at that point they decided I had to go. I was becoming an embarrassment to the department, I was told. So I left, very distressed, very upset at not being able to protect these people and children. 2 years passed. I went into the medical profession. 2011 came and it hit the headlines in a local paper that Beechwood was under investigation for child abuse. I then telephoned the police explaining that I had documentary evidence of willful neglect of these children at the time, and I had children's statements of abuse at that time. And they came to interview me some time later. I also took the documentary evidence that I had into lawyers and gave them copies also. I couldn't throw that paperwork away. I knew what had happened to those children. I held on to it. hoping that I, in some way, could help bring some kind of justice to what I'd witnessed as an inspector. And I hope that is the case.
Because you are, you've been called by the Goddard inquiry, haven't you, to
I
give
have been called
evidence?
to give evidence, yes.
Okay, and any idea when that might happen?
I have no idea. I've not been given a date as yet, but I wait with great anticipation for that meeting to take place.
This must have been, it's quite hard to comprehend what you've been through, what you've witnessed, to then think, I am going to change this. I am going to make a positive out of a negative, to then go into inspecting children's homes to try and make a difference, to then be faced with this kind of inaction in the face of this overwhelming body of evidence that no one even decided to investigate and look into. Tell us what toll that took on you.
It was quite staggering, actually. It didn't sit very comfortable with me, but I did want to face my fears, and that's one of the main reasons I became an inspector. I wanted to change in some way. I wanted to help others that may have possibly been experiencing what I did as a child, but I was absolutely blown away to realise, I mean, my time was in the 80s, to see that culture so open. This abuse wasn't hidden in any way. This was quite open. This behaviour was normalised, so much so the staff felt quite happy to behave in that way in front of an inspector on an official visit. That's how normal this behaviour was to them. And I was blown away by that, to believe that had gone on for all those years, probably way before my time in Beechwood, and for that behaviour still right up until the 2000, that behaviour in children's homes was happening. I had no idea I was going to face that. I was incredibly naive of me to think I could have an impact to change that kind of culture. But I tried, but unfortunately I failed.
Well, people would admire you greatly for at least trying to change things. You say you were dismissed, you feel, for challenging the status quo, and then you had some terrible news about an 18-year-old in one of the homes that you went to look at, didn't you?
Yes, she wasn't 18, she was just 15 years old. After I had inspected Beechwood and shared my concerns, it was not long after, probably 18 months or so after, I'm not quite sure of the time frame, but a young girl hung herself. Again, that was a huge, huge blow, and I carry the burden of that young girl's death upon my soul. Because again, I just think to myself, well, if somebody had listened, if somebody had acted, maybe if I'd have took a different avenue, things may have been a little bit different. But I'm afraid that wasn't the case.
Well, you can't take all of that on because you were the one at least
you do.
tried.
You do.
I appreciate that. What should happen to those people who turned a blind eye to it, who turned a blind eye and a blind ear to your evidence?
Each and every one of those hierarchy who had the duty of care towards those children, to protect them, to look after them. Each and every one of them have the blood of those children upon their hands. They should, although it's not criminal to turn your face away from child abuse, it should be. And they should be made and brought to account for what they did. Because what they did in my eyes is criminal, but unfortunately it's not in the eyes of the law. They were paid taxpayers' money. They were paid an awful lot of money to protect children. And they completely and utterly failed in absolutely every way.
You would like to see investigations, people brought to account?
Absolutely. And I'm hoping the Goddard inquiry is going to do that.
Well, as you say, the Goddard inquiry is this far-reaching inquiry into child abuse, allegations of child abuse in many institutions. The fact that we actually have this now, do you think illustrates some kind of sea change in our society where, as you say, so eloquently said, back in the 80s, you were the inspector. People were so brazen about it, they would behave that way when you were there. So how far have we come from that point? And do you think the fact that we're having these inquiries means that as a society we are drawing a line in the sand and saying no more?
I hope so. I really hope so, Claire. But you've only got to look at Rotherham and Oxford and all the other places. You know, these outrageous figures that the NSPCC and Rape Crisis are reporting are the highest record numbers, and those figures speak for themselves. And I don't think we have got a hand on it. And it's very alarming. I think that this problem is huge. It's happening on an industrial scale. And I think it's going to take an awful lot to bring about that change, and that change has got to come from within the police forces, the councils, the social services. It's across the board, and we've got to change in terms of how we deliver our compassionate care to children and to our hospitals and again to our care sectors. It's been disgraceful the way we've treated these people.
Looking back now, you try to speak up. Many people listening will say, well, what more could she have done? She went into that sector, she tried to change things. You can't often take on the system and beat the system. How do you reconcile what you attempted to do with the outcome?
Me personally, I wrote a book that helped me enormously. I don't know. I don't have the answer for that one, Claire. People's lives have been totally destroyed. You can't recover from that, can you? These are people's lives. They're not figures. They're actual people's lives that have been totally destroyed. Thousands of people. I don't know how you reconcile that.
And as somebody who was mistreated within the family and then by the system, how do you handle it all these years on? Does that ever leave you? No, it does never leave you, no. If anyone's listening to this now who has carried that kind of secret with them for years, what would your advice be to them?
I would say come forward. It does help enormously. I didn't think it would, and I didn't think I would ever speak out, Claire. It's took me 35 years to speak out. Yes, it's quite liberating. It's empowering. So do so. I would encourage anybody to do so. It's that is not your guilt and your problem and not your weight to carry. That is theirs. The people that abused you, it certainly isn't your weight to carry.
Joni Cameron-Blair speaking to me earlier. Well, we asked Nottingham and Nottinghamshire County Council for their response, and they gave us this statement, which we voiced.
Both the City and County Councils are supporting the police in a major ongoing investigation into allegations of historical child abuse in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, spanning a period from 1950s onwards. Children's homes should be a place of safety, and abuse of any kind is a dreadful and damaging failure of duty and trust, which we take extremely seriously. We will not shy away from these historical allegations, and with the police are committed to bringing perpetrators to justice and ensuring professional standards of care are upheld. From 1974 to 1998, the County Council had responsibility for the management of children's homes in Nottingham City, and in April 1998, County Council social care staff working in the city transferred to the City Council. We are not able to comment on any specific allegations whilst the police investigation is ongoing. However, all allegations made will be thoroughly investigated, and we would urge anyone with information about alleged abuse having taken place, however long ago, to come forward.
And a Nottinghamshire police spokesman said since the launch of Operation Daybreak, a total of 154 people have come forward to Nottinghamshire Police to make allegations of historic abuse which relate to the former Beechwood community home. We do not comment on individual cases. However, we can confirm that to date, 2 people have been charged with offences and are currently being processed through the court system. 4 people are on police bail pending further inquiries, and a number of others have been interviewed in relation to the inquiry. It would not be appropriate to comment further on what is an ongoing investigation. If any of what you've just heard has struck a chord with you, if you, like Joni Cameron-Blair, have tried to be a whistleblower, how did it turn out for you? Were you listened to, or does her experience ring true with you? Did you find it very difficult for anybody to take you seriously? 85058 on the text message number. Apologies, we're slightly late for the news headlines. It's 10:36 now.
on digital, online, smartphone and tablet. This is BBC 5 Live.
With the 5 Live News, I'm Rachel Bland. All three of the other candidates in the Labour leadership race have made direct attacks on their left-wing rival Jeremy Corbyn, urging members not to vote for him. Andy Burnham is the latest to criticise Mr Corbyn's plans as lacking in financial and economic credibility. Ballot papers are being sent out this morning. Lord Janner has failed to attend court to face historical child abuse charges for a second time. His lawyers told Westminster Magistrates Court he'd tried to facilitate an appearance by the former Labour peer today. He's applying for him to appear via video link. Greece's parliament has backed draft terms for a third bailout. The proposed deal involves tax rises and spending cuts in return for an €85 billion rescue package. The Chinese authorities have insisted the quality of air and water in the city of Tianjin is safe, despite massive explosions on Wednesday at a warehouse storing hazardous chemicals. Investigators are still trying to determine the cause of the blasts, which killed at least 55 people. And the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has expressed his regret at the suffering and sacrifices of many people during the Second World War. He said Japan should make sure there's no repeat of such a conflict. Sport now, here's Seth.